I want to welcome everyone here. My name is Dave Vale. I'm the CEO of Vision Coaching, and I'm really excited to be presenting today our Discover Your Style, Leadership in Action webinar with Lianne Krakauer. And I wanted to tell you a quick story about, and Lianne's going to talk about different styles of leadership and how that impacts, our ability to lead and what we need to learn and how to communicate effectively. And I'm going to go back a number of years. I was in my 20s, late 20s actually, and I was a consultant with the company. And actually, what brought me to Eastern Canada was distributing behavioral assessments to workplace. And when I was looking at this particular behavioral assessment, Lianne's going to talk about Myers-Briggs type indicator. When I was learning about this particular assessment, it was a different one, but very complementary. I did the assessment myself, and it talked about my style and some of the strengths and some of the limitations or opportunities that arise. And I thought, I was reading the research and I was looking at the reliability, test, retest, and the validity and this sort of thing. And I thought, I should actually have my whole family completed. And this is prior to being married. So it was my family being my mother, my father, and my brother. And so we all did these assessments and we reviewed them. And I think the most impactful thing that I learned back then, and I've carried forward, was the value of understanding the differences. And my mother said something really interesting. She said, I so wished I had this information long before with you two boys, because I realized I was parenting you both the same way, and clearly it worked with one of you and not the other. And at some point I can share who it worked with and who it may have not worked with, but it's a really good example of how it's so important to understand your style, but also the style of the people around you. So we're going to dig into this a little more. Lianne's got this wonderful presentation. I mentioned I'm with Vision Coaching. We've been sponsoring these along with a number of partners like Lianne and others. There's Lianne. Hello, Lianne. Coming in from Toronto. I'm coming from New Brunswick. And we've got a really full group here, Lianne. We're both part of Vision Coaching. And you can see our vision statement there. We offer one-to-one coaching, team coaching, coaching, education, and consultation. We've been doing webinar series. And we do a lot of kind of our core business going back to the one-to-one leadership coaching. And we use assessments like so frequently, right, Lianne? And in fact, on many occasions, you've come to me or emailed me and said, hey, Dave, we're working with this particular client. I'd like to use the Myers-Briggs type indicator with them. And I would say probably more than 50% of the time, which is always like, awesome, go for it. So we use assessments within coaching quite frequently. And Lianne's going to describe that a little more. So I'm going to get you moved to the next slide, Lianne. There she is. Yeah. So I've had the pleasure of working with Lianne for how long?
At least 10 years, maybe.
It's been a while.
Yeah,
it's been a long time. Yeah. And we and Lianne, I can say, is one of our highest rated coaches when we do evaluations. She is actually hard to work with because she's so good and she's so busy. And so just before Christmas, a couple of days before Christmas, we got on the phone and I said, Lianne, would you please do a webinar with me? And, and you came up with this, and I'm really excited to share this with people. You have a really interesting background. I'll let you describe it, Lianne, and then we can jump into this. I do want to give a little bit of housekeeping before that. And that would be, if you have questions, please feel free to ask them. You can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and or chat. And Lianne will be asking you to use chat as well at different times. So just share kind of what you're seeing and what you're hearing, what you're thinking in the chat function. If you have any technical challenges, Genevieve, who I think may make herself, there she is, can help you out. And we're going to keep this tight. We're going to keep this to the hour. And Lianne's going, enough, Dave, let me get going. So I'm going to, and I'll be jumping in and out and participating and learning along with everyone. So over to you, Lianne.
Thank you, Dave. And thanks for the introduction to today. and your own experience with the Myers-Briggs type indicator. This is a tool that I've been using for many, many years. And the first time that I came across actually was when I was a law student, which is how I started out my own career. In my early 20s, found myself somewhere that I really didn't think I should be, but there I was, and went off to the local career counseling service at the University of Toronto, and they gave me a Myers-Briggs type indicator. And lo and behold, it wasn't really the best fit for me. However, I stuck it out. I stayed the course with a bit of a leave in between, and figured out how to make the most out of that education and what to do next. So I didn't stay in law for very long. I made a pivot into education. I did a counseling psychology degree, and then I discovered the wonderful profession of coaching. And at every step of the way, at least 2 or 3 times, I came back to this Myers-Briggs type indicator, which is many of you, I would imagine, are familiar with, as a tool for understanding myself and my personality strengths and some of the blind spots I face, both in professional life and in personal life. And it really helped me at various points to make decisions about how I was managing in my career, and to help others as a leader and as a coach. I recognize there's a really diverse group of people who are attending today, and I thank you for being here from across the country and from a variety of organizations and different levels in your organizations, business owners, senior leaders. We have some not-for-profit and public sector leaders. And I want to say that it doesn't matter where you're at in your career. To understand yourself is the most critical piece to improving how you show up as a leader, so that you can then have greater impact on others. We start with self, and then we can begin to change the dance, if you will, in how we interact with others. When Dave was making his introduction, he was talking about how we show up early on in life as kids, and how he showed up, he and his brother, differently as kids. And so to get us started, I want to build on that a little bit and have you think back to how you showed up as a kid, as a leader. Maybe a strange thing to think about. And I mean way back, like earliest memories. Whether you had that proverbial happy childhood or not, whether you had a tough childhood, whether you were somewhere in the middle, even if your memories are cloudy, there will be points where you can say, oh yeah, that was me as a leader. If we think about leadership as how we show up as human beings, which is really what it's all about. Here's mine. One of my earliest memories, and as I go through the old photos, I love this one. I keep coming back to it. I'm the older sister there. That's my younger sister. And one of the things I'd love to do as a kid, I'm probably about 8 here, 9, was to go into our big trunk of costumes and clothes, get dressed up, gather together my siblings and the neighborhood kids, get them to dress up, assign some roles, and put on plays and skits for the local moms and dads. That was one of my favorite things to do. So what does that have to do with leadership, you might say? Well, to me, it's about kind of tapping into what came kind of naturally to me, what I like to do, and how I might then utilize that later on in life. And when I did that first Myers-Briggs back in law school, being a performer came up, being creative, having a motivation that comes from creativity, and motivating others, like being someone who likes to gather people around them and motivate them to bring out their best and to have some fun. So now as a coach, I really emphasize creativity and motivating people to find their creative juices, if you will, and how they can become better leaders from the inside out. So I want you to pick up your earliest memory, and there's no right or wrong answer here, and think about yourself as a kid. And if you will, share in the chat a word that might come up. Maybe you were the responsible sibling who had to take charge, whether by choice or not, of what was going on in the household. Or maybe you were a bit of an entrepreneur and the kid who was out there doing the lemonade stand or had a paper route back when there was newspapers being delivered. Maybe you were a kid who liked to spend a lot of time on your own inventing things or building things. Take a second and just bring that to mind and put a word or two in the chat to save Dave Vale from being the guinea pig. And if you see something there, Dave, perhaps you can read that out to me. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, Kim saying, hi, Kim, by the way, I was the oldest girl and I was the mom to my two brothers. Oh, wow.
Yeah. So responsibility, that
Yes.
having responsibility. Anything else? A key word or phrase. And if you want to just write it down for yourself, that's okay too. Trying new activities, being independent, and as an only child, independence, and how that might influence you as a leader. Really important. Oldest and responsible, a lot of responsibility. Yeah, so we'll have some language, and you can continue to put these words in the chat or write them down. Being a teacher, playing on the blackboard, imaginative. Yeah. One of the reasons that I like the Myers-Briggs is it does give us some language for describing how we lead, so that we can understand how to be more effective, starting from that place of what comes more naturally to us, to communicate, to gather information that's important for decision making and for planning and organizing. And those early memories can sometimes give us clues to what comes more naturally, as well as what got in our way and how we might need to adapt. For those of you who are less familiar with the Myers-Briggs type indicator, or you want a bit of a refresher on where this comes from, it is one of the most widely used personality assessment tools. I believe that the latest figure is over 2 million people worldwide every year are accessing the official, that's the official Myers-Briggs type assessment. And there's lots of knockoffs available that people go online and kind of test themselves. It was developed based on work by Carl Jung, who was a Swiss psychologist and had developed personality temperament theory. That very early on, we show these signs as kids of how we behave in the world, how we prefer to interact in the world. And he didn't, and I want to emphasize this, he didn't believe that we're stuck in that at all. For anyone who's familiar with Carl Jung, he actually saw this really important interplay between what comes more naturally or what's innate to us as human beings and how we develop in response to our environment. So in response to our family of origin, first and foremost, and then where we grow up, where we go to school, our professional choices, our professional environment, hugely influential, our peers, and that can then impact how we show up and influence our behaviors or personality. And we also choose as we grow, most of us, to get outside of our comfort zone and try on new ways of behaving and showing up in the world. So knowing your type isn't meant to put you in a box. There are 16 types in total, and sometimes people resist that. It's meant to give you information about yourself so that you can then make decisions about how you're interacting with others, supporting the people around you, adapting as you need to, knowing that your peers, the people who report to you, your family members, they likely have different preferences than you do. Catherine Briggs and Isabel Myers were a mother-daughter team who took this tool to the next level, took this theory rather to the next level, and it was initially used for career development purposes, but is now a multi-purpose tool, often used in leadership engagements, as Dave was mentioning. It's a wonderful way into understanding yourself in relation to other members of your team. So I am a big fan of it. And I would say I actually use it, Dave, 90% of the time in my coaching engagements, because I find it so valuable to go back to. So I used the word preferences, and I want to emphasize that what the Myers-Briggs is measuring, if you will, is not about skills or ability, because as I said, you can learn and adapt, and we do in relation to our environment and our circumstances. What we're trying to get at, and we'll have a really quick and dirty look at it today, is what's your preferred way or default way of being on 4 dimensions that I'll introduce. And to illustrate this and have the experience of preferences, Even if you've tried this exercise before, some of you may have, I want you to pick up a pen, if you have a pen and paper, or mimic it if you don't. In the hand that you write with, right or left, whatever your natural hand is, and just sign your name. Sign your name with your preferred hand. And once you've done that, try it in the opposite. So I'm right, trying it in left. And then I'm going to ask you to put into the chat what came easily. What was it like when you did the right hand? Or the left hand, there's my assumption. What was it like when you did your preferred hand? A certain percentage of you would be left-handed. So what was that like versus what was it like in the opposite hand? Natural and familiar. Easy. Easy and natural. What about in the opposite hand? Awkward, clunky, difficult, unnatural, impossible. Yeah. Occasionally there will be the odd person who says to me, I actually learned to do the opposite hand. It's usually the left-handed types. We don't get this very often, but people who were, told or scolded and needed to learn how to use their right hand, and some who just, because they were curious, started to use the other hand. And so occasionally we'll get that type who can more fluidly flip back and forth. And you may find that as we go through the personality dimensions, that you can more fluidly move back and forth from one to the other. But really what we're looking at when we're trying to determine personality preferences is what comes more easily to you, as your preferred hand did. What's harder as a result? And if it's harder, how important is it to adapt? Not because you're in a box, because it might be helpful to use the opposite hand, if you will, now and then. So there are 4 dimensions in this assessment, and they are polar opposites in the way, for those of you who may have taken the test or are interested, the way that it's designed is as a forced choice. Because the theory is, again, that we come into life, if you will, with an innate preference, and then we adapt over time. So as I go through these rather quickly, these various dimensions, I want to encourage you to go back to those early memories. And I'll be using some examples and picking on Dave Vale where I need some examples to really understand it best as who am I, who was I in my early years, so that you can then see how you've evolved into a leader that may be using the opposite side or choosing to use the opposite side of your personality. So the 4 dimensions are here, where you get your source of energy, the way you gather information, how you tend to go about making decisions, and how you relate to the external world or plan and organize in your life. And we're going to be looking at these as polar opposites. The various combinations of these 4 dimensions can lead to a type, a 4-letter code, and there are 16 in total. So we're going to start with where you get your energy from. This is the one that's most familiar to a lot of people. And I want to emphasize that this is about energy and not sociability. And the choice here is for extroversion or introversion, and where you tend to default or prefer to land when you think about your sources of energy. Not so sociability, because sometimes introverts get a bad rap for not enjoying people as much or initiating as much social interaction. And that's not about a dislike for people or a dislike for social interaction. It's about energy levels and how much, if you have a preference for introversion, how much outward social activity you can tolerate, if you will. Whereas people with a preference for extroversion, because they get their energy from the outer world of people and things around them, they're fueled by that, they have a much higher threshold for a lot more social activity and are more likely to engage and initiate more social activity, and seek it out. So in a pandemic, what I'm hearing from my clients who are stuck at home is, particularly extroverts, they need to get out. It's like the urge to get out and just see the world. And we all feel that to some extent. But there's a real almost this strong urge to interact with people that I hear more of from clients who are extroverted, and from clients who have an introverted preference, that because their energy source comes from an internal place, quieter, kind of inward focused pursuits, they have more tolerance for working from home, working on their own, quietly pursuing their activities, and still a need to get out and interact, but more seeking out one-on-one connections, if you will. So how this shows up in terms of behaviors or traits for extroverts and introverts, if you think about yourself in a social setting first, before we take it into the professional world, is extroverts really prefer to talk things through in order to understand what they're dealing with. So they're more likely to share their thoughts freely before forming them and put themselves out there to solve their problems. Introverts prefer to think things through first in order to understand what they're going through. So they may appear to be more guarded and carefully thinking about what they have to offer before they reach their conclusion and put it out into the group. And so they can be seen to prefer to stay kind of on the sidelines or in the background, even in a social group. Though as their comfort level increases, you'll hear more and more from introverts. And you'll hear more and more from extroverts, who tend to be the ones in the social group that are jumping in, interrupting the next person, building on the story. That's how they energize. So to illustrate this, I like to describe two kids in my life, a niece and nephew, who are just a year apart. And when I take them out, even when they were young, when I would take them out for a walk to go to the park, my niece literally would not be able to contain herself. She's the younger sibling. She'd talk to everyone en route and say, "This is my auntie, and we're going to the park, and here's what I had for breakfast." And off she'd go, and running to the first kid she found in the park, whether she knew that kid or not. My nephew, who's the older sibling, and there may be an age thing as well, would be carefully kind of staying close to me and observing what was going on, and lots of stuff going on in his head, even as a young kid. And I'd have to ask some questions to pull it out of him. And as I'd ask, "What are you thinking?" I'd get like a long story about a book he was reading or a game he was playing. And he'd carry on quite comfortably by my side until we would get to the park and wait, check it out. If he saw a kid he knew, he was in, and off he would go. And I'd see that continually as they grow up. My niece will still talk out loud, even if she's playing alone, and my nephew's still quite comfortable spending a lot of time on his own. So I want you to think about yourself as an earlier person, because we certainly develop and need to develop the opposite preference as we mature and grow into ourselves as leaders. But we have a default style. If you think about how, as an extrovert, if you have identified yourself as, extroversion is my preference, how that might be an asset for leadership. It may be an obvious one, but I want you to think about how does it help you as a leader to be extroverted, and how is it a challenge? And you can put your answers in the chat, or Dave, maybe I'll ask you to weigh in here, because you've disclosed your type to me.
Yes, I have. So I would be on the more on the extroverted side. I think in terms of it's certainly a default. Where it's been an asset is, kind of getting to know people and being able to, I guess, quickly kind of share my story with people probably fits there. And I've learned through using 360 and getting really good feedback from people and colleagues and friends is that sometimes I can talk too much, or it becomes a bit of a challenge, or some people might think I'm maybe sharing a little too much. So that's where it certainly has been a challenge, and I think it falls in the extroversion. When it comes to coaching, just being very excited and passionate about it, but almost like over the top, right? And like people, so I have to tone it down and try to be a little more less expressive, I feel at times.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. It's a classic kind of blind spot for extroverts. And I see someone has offered that in the chat. Being careful I don't take over the conversation as the leader. And getting really excited. Extroverts will get really excited about whatever it is they want to share. And they tend to jump in and not give the introverts in the group a chance. And that's a very common kind of source of misunderstanding, that if you're working in a group, being aware of who's introverted, who might be sitting there saying, I'm never going to get a word in.
Right. Yeah. And I see Kim put something in there, which as an entrepreneur has been really, is this just jumping into things, and that probably relates to other parts of my other tendencies I have as well. But just everything's an opportunity and not being able to focus on, the real opportunities. So some of the maturity that still I have to be reminded of in terms of maybe slowing down a little bit.
Yeah. So extroverts need to learn to listen and make time. Introverts, and you can use the chat. I'm not going to make you put on your mics, introverts. But what would you say makes being introverted an asset for leadership for you? And what's a challenge? I know there's some introverts in there. They're usually in a group we have slightly more extroverts than introverts. Now that's in an in-person group. It may be different. Here we go. Thoughtful. Listen before you speak. Yeah. Introverts are great listeners. How important is that for leadership? Non-reactive. Absolutely. I have a client who's really shining right now during the pandemic when she's not able to interact in person. And it's actually really working for her because everything's kind of scheduled and planned. She can be non-reactive and plan for her meetings one-on-one and in groups. She has more time to prepare for both senior leadership team meetings and one-on-one meetings with her direct reports. Able to listen, whether that's on the phone or on a Zoom call. And introverts do that naturally, being able to observe things on a different level. Introverts are great observers. What's a challenge? I see a lot of great assets. What's a challenge for leaders who have an introverted preference? Making sure that your ideas are heard. Yeah, absolutely. Less assertive. As an extrovert and someone who's been a leader on a team, we want to hear from introverts. And often, if we're not really self-aware as extroverted leaders, we miss out on all the great thinking you're doing as introverts. So the challenge for introverts, that same client I was referring to, is to have a voice. And something that I'm often working on with introverted leaders is, even if you're only 75% comfortable about what you want to say at your next executive team meeting or with your direct reports, you need to say it. And that can be really uncomfortable for introverts. So we're going to dig into this more at a workshop we'll be giving in April on communication in particular. And this is a really interesting one to look at and dive into. We're touching upon each of these dimensions very quickly, but how to work with your preference and how to adapt if it is getting in your way of being the kind of leader you want to be. I'm going to move on to the next dimension, which is about how you take in information and what you tend to prefer to rely on first. So in this dimension in particular, sometimes people really struggle with it because we really do use both in order to function in the world. We need a sensing approach to understanding concrete information. So people with a sensing preference observe the facts around them. They're the real kind of facts and details people. And they tend to rely on that information and present information in that factual, sequential way. We also need to have a preference for intuition if we're going to bring about change. People with an intuition preference tend to see the big picture. They're more interested in the meaning and less interested in the facts. And so they're looking for what's possible. What can we do with the information that's presented to bring about change? What's possible here is a question they might ask rather than what is. So some typical behaviors here that I've mentioned: focus on the facts and details if you have a sensing preference. Focus on the concepts if you have an intuition preference, or the story or vision. And I want you to take a minute to look at that picture. Just focus on that picture for the next 10 seconds. And I'd like you to put in the chat what you saw. This is a real quick sniff test. What did you see? No right answers here. We might see different things depending on our preference. Path to a lighthouse, beautiful landscape. Someone didn't see it, okay, you get a pass. Windy road to a lighthouse, lighthouse. I might not have given you enough time. Details: the path, the ocean, the sky. The path, the ocean, sky. Sea and landscape, sunrise, sunset, on horizon, lighthouse, pathway. So the people who tend to see the details likely have a sensing preference. They can describe, it was a lighthouse if I gave you more time, with 3 or 4 windows in the front. There was a sunset, there were some flowers in the foreground. It was on a small island and mountains in the distance. People who have a preference for intuition might say it's a peaceful image. I see that there. Or they might have a feeling it evokes, or it might tell a story. I found this image looking for a picture of a lighthouse. Coincidentally, I had an old one and I was looking for another one just yesterday, and this popped up and it spoke to me for some reason. So I put it into the deck, and then I decided to look it up, and it's actually a lighthouse on an island in Wales. And for me, it was a sign from the universe, because my husband and I have been talking about where our next trip is going to be, and he's been really quite fixated on, we need to go to Wales and do a coastal hiking trip that he's been investigating. And I've been, well, we're not traveling for a while, but I haven't really been paying attention. And this, for me, got me really curious and became that sign from the universe. And what interested me about this picture then became a story. So I'm disclosing this dimension is for intuition. And if you'd asked me what the actual picture looked like before I'd studied it, I might not have been able to pick up on those facts. So thinking about where you tend to put your attention first, and recognizing that you use both. So then I would have gone back to look at, where is that? Oh, there's a path. What's so interesting about that lighthouse, and so on. As leaders, we really need both, and on a team, we really need to encourage both sensing and intuition in order to get anything done. So, I think about all the changes that organizations have had to adapt to so quickly in the schools. With some of you who have school-age kids or just paying attention to what's going on, like the incredible changes afoot in how education has had to be delivered over the past year, and in and out of the schools in various provinces. For teachers, parents, and kids, you need both the people who have sensing preferences to say, okay, we got to figure out the details of how this is going to work to put a whole bunch of kids online. What's the equipment that's needed? What are the resources that are needed? How are we going to do this from a curriculum perspective? You also need the people who have an intuition preference to have a vision that it can be done, that it's possible, because the tried and true methods aren't going to work when we can't have the kids in the mix, bricks and mortar, and to be willing to envision that it's possible, not perfect, but possible, to continue with education. Any questions on that one? I'll just take a pause to see if anything's come up in the chat. We're going to move on to the next dimension, which is about how you make decisions. And this is one that's probably the most influenced by your environment, the school environment that you were in, your workplace environment, your family of origin. And so I'll often see people kind of flip-flopping and trying to figure out, do I have more of a thinking preference or a feeling preference? And it does take some digging in to understand this one. So I'm going to invite you again to think about yourself as a younger person before you had to take on a particular way of decision making. perhaps where you decided to go to school, or where you decided to live, the first place that you chose to live. If you have a preference for thinking, you tend to make decisions in an objective, rational, analytical way. Look for a reasoned approach to the decision. You might have a system for that so that you can point to, well, that's the right way to go. That's the right decision, even for personal decisions. People who have a preference for feeling, on the other hand, tend to make decisions by stepping into the situation and taking a more subjective and empathetic view. Meaning they're relying on how they feel about the situation, their values, and those around them. What's the impact of this decision on the people around me? And they'll weigh that in a lot more than people might who have a preference for thinking. Again, like the previous dimension we looked at, we need both. And we need both as leaders, and we need both on teams. We need to be able to take the objective view, make the right decision, and we need to take into account feelings and impact on people. To illustrate this one, I'm going to show you a little clip that you may have seen before that really brings it home. So I'm pulling up a video, bear with me. And if there's no sound, please let me know.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
Yeah, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just... Sometimes it's like... There's this achy... I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. Ow. If you would just...
Don't...
Try to see things my...
It's just, there's all this...
I still get a laugh out of that one. I've seen it many times, and it still gives me a chuckle. Yeah, so someone said it really is me. I'm not sure, the person who put that in the chat, which one is you, but if you can identify with one or the other of those two, that might give you a clue, the male. Okay. And then interestingly, this is the one dimension where we still see a gender difference. Perhaps not surprisingly, that we are still in society reinforcing for girls to be more in touch with their feelings and the feelings of others, and not as much for boys. Now that's changing, and I think the gap is changing as a result, but we do see more boys reporting a preference for thinking later on than girls. So what this might say for you as a leader, if you have a preference for thinking, that yes, it can be valuable to remain detached and objective to get to the right decision. Get the nail out of your head. That's the solution. And we also know that it's important for leaders to have a feeling preference and to get involved personally, to show empathy and care. And that nail must really hurt. What can I do to help? We could spend a whole other hour on this one and how this is showing up for you as a leader. And again, we'll be diving more deeply into this in our follow-up webinar on how we communicate, and how, especially if you have a strong preference, learning to adapt and use the other side is quite a valuable approach to reaching more people, finding that balance. But in the interest of time, I'm going to move to the fourth and final dimension in the Myers-Briggs, which is about how you organize and plan. And this picture, this image, pretty much says it all. It is, again, another dimension where we find people adapt to their environment, often having to learn a way of being more of a judging type in a workplace, in many workplaces, which are regimented and structured, even if their preference is perceiving. So if you think about yourself as a student, it's sometimes a really good way to identify which preference came to you first, which was your default. If you have a judging preference, you might have been the student who had a plan, actually wrote out your schedule of exams and due dates and tended to meet those on time. Check things off as you go. You like to get it done. If you have a preference for perceiving, you might have been that student, I'll put my hand up, who had a sense of what was coming and had lots of lists all over the place. And only when it was getting close was there some pressure to get it done, the just in time. Pressure prompted is how I like to refer to this rather than procrastination. So think about yourself as a younger person, and then how that's perhaps played out. I've had to learn and have, I think, successfully learned to adapt some of the strategies of the people around me who have more of a judging preference. And it's really valuable if you have a perceiving preference to find that other person who takes more of a planned approach to getting things done. And similarly, it's really helpful if you have a judging preference and you tend to kind of be more structured and routine, to learn from your colleagues, partners, people in your household who have a perceiving type, because we can also benefit from being more spontaneous and adapting, especially right now. So one way I like to think about this is almost left brain, right brain thinking. And I don't know if there's actually been any research in connecting these two. But it strikes me that if you have a preference for judging and it's all about the plan and routines, that it's more of a left brain or left hemisphere way of approaching day-to-day life. I like to have structure, goals, do things quickly, and follow the plan. On the right hemisphere, what we know about the right hemisphere is that it's more open to what's coming, what's possible. It's more about trusting the process of the journey. And so there's more of a readiness in that case for last minute changes and being able to adapt. We know from some of the neuroscience research on how people are making good decisions and being effective in their lives is that we need to integrate and find a way of integrating our thinking. So similarly, from a personality perspective, we want to try to use both. So with that very quick analysis of all four of the dimensions, we now can start to hypothesize.
Lianne?
Yes.
I think you've answered partly this question, but I just see a question that came up. And it says, what about if you can make the plan, but can't keep to it and do the rush at the end?
Yeah.
And I think so just kind of some curiosity. So clearly someone who would be, you didn't put as a procrastinator, but you said, so someone who probably got a little bit of both, can do the plan, but has trouble keeping to the plan. Any
that strikes me as perceiving without knowing this person.
Yeah, me as well.
Really good intentions, and I'm going to put the plan together, but I don't always follow it. And sometimes that's okay. Like recognizing that I'm going to do something else instead, having a hard time following it. Mm-hmm. Someone who is truly has a judging preference, they're going to follow the plan. And I'd have to, if I'm coaching them, say, sometimes it's okay to walk away from the plan.
Right.
So the number of lists on the desk, if you're the person with like lots of paper, and possibly it's hard to kind of know this without knowing you, that's a sign of perceiving. But if you like to make the plan and stick to it, and you get kind of great satisfaction from that, more of a judging type. I'll give you a personal anecdote that may land in my household. I disclosed that I'm a perceiving type, and my husband has a judging preference that's quite strong. And so when it comes to meal planning, he likes to sit down every Saturday and write out what we're going to eat for the following week, and then do a shopping list based on that. And he first started doing this for the kids, but the kids are grown and gone, and he still really likes doing it. And it's always been hard for me because I don't know what I'm going to feel like eating on a Tuesday. And I like to leave things open, and I like to shop and kind of see what's there. So we talk about this because I do love this stuff, and probably to his dismay, I'll come home and talk about it again. How we work with our preferences, and one of the things we came up with is he can do the planning, but I reserve the right to call it off and say, no, Tuesday we're not doing what you said, or we're going to change it up, and he's going to be okay with that. So recognizing that there are these differences, and we can work with them and often get a better outcome. So if you see any words here, were there any other questions that came up? The combination, yeah, combination. The words may be helpful. I'd asked you at the beginning to think about your style as a kid, and now you can see a couple of words here that may resonate for you as a leader. So write it down if it speaks to you. Someone had talked about being responsible as a leader. Perhaps you're the responsible executor who gets things done, or a dedicated steward. If you're more on the extroverted side and mobilizing people, you might be an engaging mobilizer as an ENFJ, or a strategic director. There are no right or wrong types for leadership. There are definitely types that tend to want to be in more senior leadership roles. And there's some research on that, which I can share at a later date, or respond to questions after today's webinar, that shows that some types will tend to pursue paths that lead to more executive senior roles, and some will prefer to be contributors or be entrepreneurs, or pursue different opportunities that don't take them into more senior roles. The important thing is to understand from today, and as you think about this, what's unique about your leadership style. And perhaps one thing that you might try on, if you think about it as hats, something you might try on of the opposite preference. So I would like people to take a moment and put in the chat or write down what you discovered. I see someone's discovered they're an engaging mobilizer. Great, hang on to that word. There is power in writing it down, putting it out there for memory recall. So one thing you discovered about your leadership style today that stands out, and perhaps one thing you want to try on to be a better leader. And I'll give you a minute to plunk that into the chat or write it down on your own. While that's happening, Dave, anything you discovered that's new?
Oh, well, always. I'm just enjoying it. I'm chuckling more, and I'm glad you brought it up, about how we often have partners who really complement us nicely, or we complement them. You talk about yourself and Kevin. My wife, very, very different kind of approach, and just working through that and understanding the strengths of both, right? And not just wanting everyone to kind of bend to your particular style. And so just that is, especially around the planning piece, that's just a good reminder, and how this impacts our personal lives, and then watching our kids to support them.
Yeah.
But I'm a impassioned catalyst, I believe was the
impassioned catalyst.
Yeah.
Another one in there, enthusiastic improviser, engaging mobilizer. Yeah. Yeah, and often I'll hear from people the most useful thing is I was able to go home and talk to my partner or my kid or a parent about, why we have tension around certain things, why we do things differently. You think about the decision-making tension between thinking and feeling, that there can be all sorts of dynamics around that. And once we have some language that's not judgmental about how this is a default way and we're trying to adapt, it can kind of cool things down and allow you to grow together in relation to people in your lives, whether that's at home or at work.
Okay. And this is interesting. Someone put to us, just being one, seeing themselves as a one kind of style and looking at exploring and, being another. And I think that's a really interesting way to look at, because I can think of the for example, the feeling side, how that's really, which I have, has supported me in some business decisions and been really effective, and then has really been Achilles heel in others. And there's a couple of examples where, really recognizing how, your strengths overused become a liability.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it is about using this tool as one way into, as I said at the beginning, understanding self as a whole, understanding as a human being that we all have strengths and we all have cracks in our the way we're doing things that we got to look at and say, okay, well, how's that getting in our way, and what might I do differently? And sometimes looking at the opposite type to you can be really helpful. So for me, as an ENFP, I'll often turn to the ISTJ. So instead of an extrovert, an introvert, and so on, whether I know someone or not, or I just read the material about the opposite preference to think about how could I do things differently here? And that might be useful for me. So if you're interested in learning more about this, here are some options. If you've never taken a Myers-Briggs, it is, as Dave mentioned at the beginning, something that we can offer as part of a 6-month leadership coaching program. I've mentioned that we'll be running a workshop style, so fewer people, and digging into how to utilize the personality assessment to communicate with confidence when you're making decisions, when you're making a presentation, when you're speaking with your direct reports, peers, or more senior leaders. It will be more interactive as much as we can do so on Zoom and limited to 30 people. And we'll include a personal communications report based on the Myers-Briggs assessment. And I believe that's April 11th or 8th, April 11th. We also can design a half-day retreat for intact teams. It's a really great way to take this to another level, as I mentioned, and understanding not just yourself, but the preferences of those on your team for a variety of purposes, including communication being a big one, and how you're organizing and planning as a team. And in that case as well, you'd each get your own personalized interpretive reports and some learning resources. I think that's it, unless there's questions. Dave, I'm going to turn.
Yeah, well, we're going to have a little Q&A at the end. We'll get all the content done within the hour here. There's a couple more slides I want to share with folks. And for people that have questions, please just, you can share them in the Q&A or on chat, and Lianne take a few minutes to answer those questions. So just some upcoming virtual training, Tough Discussions at Work. That's next Thursday, I believe is the 19th, with Kelly Van Buskirk. He's an employment lawyer. He's done some stuff with us, brilliant guy. And he'll essential training for anyone who doesn't work alone. I love that. So that's Kelly. I'll get you to advance to the next one. There's an upcoming program. It's called Pivotal Growth. It's supporting people, particularly if you're in the business development role or function in your role. This is a 6-month program. In any of these, if you go, you can, in this case, you can email Lisa directly, lisa@visioncoachinginc.com. But for any events, you can go to visioncoachinginc.com and just go to events, and you can sign up for these upcoming things, webinars and virtual training. And the next one is with Lianne. And as Lianne pointed out, there is only space for 30, and you'd have to have it's on April 8th. And you need to have it by, I believe, mid-March, right? Because there's an assessment component. So you'd have to sign up quickly for this. And if you have any questions, you can just reach out to us. But again, you can sign up going to the events page. I'd encourage you to do that quickly if you want to participate in this and get to hang out with Lianne. And I think I'll be co-moderating maybe with you, Lianne.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be fun. And then that's it from terms of content. Lianne, thank you so much. You were saying you're not really super comfortable in this format, and I thought you just did an excellent job. And your pace is awesome, and so well done. A question I have for you is kind of related if you're gonna, or actually, I think you have some resources. But I was just thinking of the extrovert and introvert or introversion, and the learning from an extrovert's perspective that came from a book called Quiet. And I believe you think that's a really good resource. And I saw someone mention in the chat area, they talked about ambiverts. And that's the first time I ever heard about ambivert. Can you tell folks a little bit about that?
Yeah, first I'll say, yes, I love Quiet and everyone should read it, whether you're an extrovert or an introvert. And if you don't have the time or energy for the book, the author, Susan Cain, also has a TED Talk.
Right.
And coincidentally, she's a lawyer, and she talks about the power of introversion professionally, and how now as a public speaker, like what it's like to be a public speaker and an introvert. The idea of being an ambivert, if you follow the pure theory and research of the Myers-Briggs, doesn't actually exist, which people don't like, because the theory is that you have a default. You came into the world as right-handed or left-handed. However, you can develop such that it feels like you're an ambivert. The same way as I mentioned, people who started, say, left-handed and then learned right-handed, or do certain things with their right hand and other things with their left hand, they really feel like both come easily. And I see that over and over again. And if that's the case, then what I say to people is great. Most of the time, lucky you can kind of fluidly move back and forth. Sometimes it can be a challenge, because sometimes it means I'm not sure what to rely on for this decision, or I'm being really pulled. It's a tug of war for me. And there is some value in knowing, okay, this is the default that I'm going to go to. Right. And I'm really strong on envisioning possibilities. So I'm going to go with that. And I'm going to bring in someone to help me with the details. Right. So it can be valuable to have both, if that helps.
Yeah, that does. And in fact, I did the assessment in Susan Cain's book, and it showed me in that ambivert category. And it helped me explain maybe how I feel like I can flow back and forth. And I was sharing with you before, it's, although I would, a tendency to extroversion, wow, when I hang out with a really strong extrovert, I can tell I'm they're at just a different level than, you know what I mean? And I appreciate it, but I don't have that level of energy. So I just thought that was really interesting.
Have you taken this? There is also something called the step 2. So for people who have done the Myers-Briggs and they want to go deeper, there's another version of the assessment that's a step 2. And it actually then breaks down each of those 4 categories into 5 factors. So you might find, because in your case, you're saying extroversion, but you might find one of the factors of the 5, you tend towards introversion. You might have 3 out of the 5, but 2 of them you tend towards introversion. And that can be really useful.
Okay.
I've done that once or twice, and it explained for me, I'm quite close on the thinking feeling.
Right.
And when, when I was in law school, I came out on thinking, and now I'm more feeling for sure. But I think what it showed for me is I was a questioning feeling type. So one of the factors was how much you question. Okay. And questioning is a very typical thinking preferred behavior, not as much for feeling types. So that can be useful for people who are interested in that. We can take it to the next level.
Let's make sure we include that in the follow-up. Mm-hmm. And there's some questions that are coming through. We'll answer as a follow-up. We're at the top of the hour right now. I think there's one more slide. It shows some of the resources. Is that right?
Yeah, for people who want to find out more about just the actual assessment itself and some of the resources available. Most of my information and my training in Myers-Briggs comes from Psychometrics Canada. They're based in Alberta and Edmonton. They have quite a few free resources available. This first one is something you have to pay for, but well worth it if you want to look at your type and others, and they can send a PDF copy. And then these are a few books that I really like. On psychometrics.com, there's the video I showed, and a lot of articles and just kind of tips for using type. To do the actual test, you need to have a licensed practitioner. People will sometimes ask me, can I go and do the test online? And you can't unless you have a licensed practitioner actually administer the official version of the report, which is what I'm here for. Perfect.
Okay. Well, let's we've got a minute over. And I think we're going to leave it there at this stage. We will send out, as we always do, a video of this. Please feel free to share it, folks, with anyone that you might think that, might find this valuable. I certainly found it valuable. I've been through this a few times, and man, you always pick up new stuff. So thank you so much, Lianne, for your time. Looking forward to doing some work on this in the future with you. And thanks to everyone for showing up. We're getting some nice kudos to you, Lianne, in the chat area. So people are obviously enjoying this. I hope everyone stays safe, and we'll be in touch soon, and we'll have the video with the some follow-up questions will be answered as well. And that'll be coming through in the next few minutes. The next few days, not minutes. Lianne, last thought to you, and then we can shut this all down here.
Thanks for coming out today, everyone, and to those who contributed. I really appreciate that, and hope we'll see you again.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.